Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session, Mental Health as Business Sustainability, Protecting the Human Core of Performance. I'm Rita Choi, founder of AsiaHRM and Coaching Engage Plus. AsiaHRM is a human resources community for Asia, advocating leadership and coaching. For Coaching Engage Plus, is a platform connecting qualified coaches with their potential clients. We also have AR augmented coaching. So I'm so delighted to be here today to be your moderator. As organizations navigate a world that is becoming simultaneously greener, more digital, and more pressured, one truth is becoming clearer than ever. Mental health is not a well-being initiative. It's a core driver of sustainable business performance. Today, we'll explore what it truly means to protect the human core of performance, not just to prevent burnout, but to build organizations where people can think well, feel well, and perform well over the long term. I'm honored to be joined by three wonderful ladies here, the incredible experts. Stephanie Rose, counselor at Central Minds Limited, Hong Kong. Melissa Yao, HKPCA certified counselor and senior advisor to FTI Hong Kong. Last but not the least, Dr. Bennett Wong, clinical psychologist, Psychotherapy Healing Space, Hong Kong. So before we dive deep into the session today, I would love to have our viewers today to say hi to every one of us and let us know where you are from. And also, before we begin the session, I want to highlight a few key ideas that frame today's conversation, all of which come directly from our session brief. First one, psychological safety is not a strategic asset. Psychological safety is a strategic asset, not a soft concept. I'm sure that our speaker today will share with us what's meant by psychological safety. The second one, burnout is an organizational risk, not an individual weakness. Third, leaders shape the emotional climate of their teams. Fourth, human-centered cultures protect brand trust and employer reputation. Lastly, mental health is part of risk management and long-term resilience. With that, let's dive into our panel today. But before I start with the first question, I would love to have our speakers to let us know more about themselves. And for those who are watching us today, just feel free to put your questions or comments in the comment box. And our wonderful ladies here will get your questions answered. Okay, who would like to go first to introduce yourself? Anyone? Maybe Melissa, you'd like to be the first one? I can't hear you.
Yeah,
You're on mute.
Yes, I just put myself on mute. I'll go first. Hi, everyone.
Yes.
I'm Melissa Yu. I'm a certified counselor at HKPCA, Hong Kong Professional Counseling Associations. I'm currently practicing at St. John's Cathedral Counseling Services, where I do individual counseling, couple counseling, and family counseling, and both in Mandarin English. But before I become a counselor, I spent 20 years in the finance industry as a lawyer and a chief compliance officer. I work at firms like UBS, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, ICBCI. So I have experienced firsthand what it's like working in a high pressure environment where the pace is tense and expectations are high. And oftentimes the conversation around mental health don't really keep up with the reality. So today, I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that I can bring both perspective to the conversation, the clinical lens, but also the lens where a lived experiences from the inside organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Stephanie, would like to be the next?
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Rita, for having me on this panel. My name is Steph, and I am a counsellor at Central Minds. I work mainly with adults with a range of different presentations, but I do work with a lot of people who are struggling with work-related mental health challenges. I also work part-time for City Mental Health Alliance. So City Mental Health is an alliance of organizations, so from the banking industry, legal, consulting, real estate, you name it. They come together to set standards, do research, and share best practice about how to improve employee mental health and the overall working experience. So that's a bit about me. Before I moved into mental health, similar to Melissa, I had another life in corporate. So I did this kind of career pivot later on in life. And before that, I was working in the corporate innovation space. So something quite different, but actually I found through my work now that there's quite some similar themes that translate into the mental health space. So I'll share more about that later. Yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Stephanie. Dr. Benedict Wong, are you here? Or did we lose you? Because I can see the screen is all black.
Is it? I can see you all.
Oh,
Can you
but
hear
we
me?
can't see you. But yeah, just go ahead to introduce yourself, although we can't see you.
Thank you, Rita, for introducing me. I'm Bernadette, and before I am a clinical psychology, I worked 10 years, over a decade, over management and HR areas. So I do feel what is work stress for me as an employee, but now I am an employer, and I have a couple of employees working for me. I'm trying to balance the work-life balance for them as well. And I'm so glad that I can be one of the panelists to share my experience to, all of the viewers and people who are in LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedict. I understand that Benedict has been a volunteer for different social work in Hong Kong. So I have to say salute to you. Okay, so without further ado, just a kind reminder that for those who are watching us today, just feel free to put your questions or comments in the comment box. Okay, so let's start our first question. Okay, so from your clinical perspective, what are the psychological conditions that allow people to sustain high performance over time and not just survival work, but truly function at their best? I understand that Melissa, you would like to go first with this question?
Sure, I'll go first, and I'll be brief because I'm sure all the expert here has a lot to say. So I'll pick three to go through briefly. The first thing I would say is emotional dosage, and let me explain what I mean. So from a neuroscience perspective, all emotions like anxiety or fear or even anger, they're all here. They're not design flaws. They're here to protect us. Well, let me just take anxiety, for example. Anxiety is basically screening for your future and looking for anything that possibly go wrong and alert you for it, right? So the problem is not anxiety itself. The problem is intensity. Because when an emotion is so huge, it pushes you outside of window of tolerance. Now, this is a psychological term that we use a lot. Push you outside of window of tolerance, and then you get into the coping mode of fight or freeze. And that's when the problem comes, because then when you get into fight or freeze, your cognitive thinking is narrow, your performance falls apart. And so what we are saying here is that what you need to do is not to get rid of, say, oh, I have anxiety, let me get rid of anxiety. What we need to do is to really learn how to cope with the anxiety at the right dose so that the anxiety is just right enough to sharpen your thoughts, but not so much that you get into the fight or freeze mode and where you got overworked, over-prepared, fighting mode, or, fighting mode where you avoid it, procrastinate. So So all in all, it really starts with embracing that emotion instead of pushing that away, and embracing and then say it's okay to not feel okay. And that's really one mindset. You want to embrace the emotions and not push it away. The second thing I want to say is about internal narrative. Because I use CBT a lot with my client, and I noticed that a lot of high performers, they all often get into this cognitive distortion. I use the psychology term, but easier way to understand is thinking trap. They got into the thinking traps of about black and white thinkings or catastrophe thinking. Something like, oh, if I don't get this deal, I'll get fired. That kind of catastrophe thinking. Now, those patterns can drive you for a while, but eventually, because the intensity of anxiety, it's going to wind you down. So sustainable performance means that the comfortability that you can see things more adaptive, more accurately. So, we always say what we say to ourselves makes what we say, shapes what we believe. What we believe shapes what we think who we are. So the way you tell yourself, is it a fixed mindset that, oh, if I don't get this deal, I'm a failure? Or if you tell yourself with a growth mindset that, oh, if I don't get this deal, let me try to learn from the lesson learned and move from there. So it's a shift. It's that shift of your mindset that helps you to build that resilience over career. The third thing I really want to emphasize, because oftentimes it's underused, it's very transformative, but it's underused and it's overlooked in our high-stake society, is compassion. Self-compassion in the face of making a mistake. So I spent years in this industry where our industry reward with inner critics, right? The things we tell yourself, the voice we tell ourselves, I'm not good enough. I need to do something better. We got rewarded on that. However, in psychology world, the evidence really shows self-compassion predicts work engagement because it really boosts your psychological asset, where there's a hope, self-efficacy, and also resilience. So it's very easy to understand, because if you spend the whole time, spending time on beating yourself over mistake, you are burning your field that really need to learn, and move forward. So treat yourself like you would be for respected, colleagues, and then treat yourself as a respected colleague, and then you can bounce back. And that speed of bouncing back eventually becomes a very competitive strength for your career. So those are the three things I would summarize. It's the dosage for emotions. It's your self-compassion as a recovery tool. It's inner narratives, how you have a narrative that's adaptive and growth mindset. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this point of three, right? Okay, very good. Stephanie, would you like to supplement?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's a sense of safety and autonomy. So first, I'll start with safety. And I think this really links nicely to what Melissa has shared as well, because for all of those internal kind of processes to happen, you need to feel safe to be able to come to work and practice those tools and do that. So if we think about safety, it's one of the most basic human needs. Like, think about Maslow's hierarchy. I think it's the second layer. The first one's like food, water, that kind of thing. Safety is the next one. So for anyone to thrive, you need to have that sense of safety first. You can give people as many creative tools and run as many nice team bonding events as you like, but none of that is actually going to land unless you have a sense of safety in the workplace. So what do I mean by safety? Of course, physical safety, really important. Nobody wants the roof to fall on their head while they're at their desk. But what we're talking about more is psychological safety. So people feeling secure enough to communicate openly, be themselves, try new things, take healthy risks, and collaborate with each other. So just quickly for a definition for those who aren't familiar with psychological safety, it's defined by Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson as the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team feels safe to take interpersonal risk. So you think back to what Melissa was just sharing about being compassionate and not punishing yourself or others for making mistakes. That's a super important prerequisite that you need in the workplace for that to happen. So just to share a little bit about how it shows up, how a lack of psychological safety shows up in the clinic with the work that I do with my clients. I'll see clients who are, for example, like very uncertain about their future at work, but they feel unsafe to ask about it. So they're unsure if they're doing well, if they're going to have a job in 6 months, but they don't actually feel comfortable asking and just having an open conversation about that. They don't feel comfortable voicing concerns or ideas within their team, and therefore they completely detach, or what we call quiet quitting, or they're afraid of making mistakes. And then they develop what we call in psychology maladaptive perfectionism, and then anxiety as a result. So that's safety. And then autonomy. So autonomy gives people a sense of control and a sense of agency, which is super important for self-confidence, self-efficacy, but it also helps to meet that need for safety, because when you feel more of a sense of control over the different variables that you have going on in your life, you feel more secure. So just to share on how a lack of autonomy shows up in my therapy room, it's often clients who have a micromanager, very common. People who are not given any sense of the bigger picture of how their work fits in with the broader organizational objectives, or it's clients who aren't provided any feedback whatsoever or development opportunities. I think the lack of feedback is maybe a less obvious one, but I'm going to get into that later. And I'll talk about how feedback really helps to serve that need for autonomy and control then.
Thank you, Stephanie, for these 2 points, right? Safety and autonomy. Dr. Benedict, anything to add on?
I think the two ladies are speaking exactly what I want to say, but I just want to add on is the security that makes employees feel attached or belongs to this company, so they can perform well. We are humans, like we won't have a superpower that can perform exactly the same every day or in a high performance every day. But giving a secure sense of security, this will prolong our performance even better.
Of security, it will prolong our performance even better. Very, very nice. So let's thank you so much for all these points, right? And let's move on to another question. So let's see, there is a comment here. Okay, someone saying hi from Pakistan. Okay, good. Let's move on. Second question. So burnout is often treated as an individual issue. What organization pattern do you see? Rocking. Burnout is often treated as an individual issue. What organization patterns do you see that actually creates burnout, even in companies with good intentions? Anyone who would like to take this question first? Maybe this time, Stephanie?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, so a simple way to explain burnout is when you are feeling overburdened. So you're under a lot of pressure. Maybe you're working really long hours, but you're simultaneously experiencing a depletion of resources. I think often people think of burnout as being the long hours, the hardworking bit, and less about the other bit. So we'll get into more detail about what that looks like. And support in this case doesn't necessarily mean like more hands, more help. It can mean your organization supporting you in different ways to meet those core needs that you have. So that might be needs for safety, needs for control, needs for autonomy, for example. And if an employee feels burnt out, they're less likely to be engaged and motivated. And that's when you see the knock-on effects to performance as well as individual mental health. So to answer the question, one of the themes that I see in my therapy practice, one of the organizational patterns that I see is a poor feedback culture. So when I talk about feedback culture, I'm not talking about like 360-degree reviews, because most organizations do have that in place. What I'm talking about is more of an ongoing culture of giving regular feedback. Feedback delivered, for example, like right after a meeting, or perhaps it's right after a presentation, or maybe it's after a deliverable has been submitted, like it's feedback in that moment. And the other important thing I think about feedback is a lot of the time we think about it as being like downward. So perhaps a manager giving their team member feedback, but it can also be upward and sideways as well. And I think that's how you really build the culture, is when you have it going in different directions. And that builds a culture of psychological safety. And the data, interestingly, really supports this as well. So according to a survey from Gallup, in 2024, employees who receive valuable feedback are 57% less likely to be burnt out. And 80% of employees who receive meaningful feedback in the past week were fully engaged, which matters a lot because engagement and burnout tend to move in opposite directions. If people aren't receiving regular feedback, or perhaps they are, but it's really vague or it's very poorly timed, like it's delivered way too late, they have no sense of how they're doing. They have no sense of how they're performing. And this really gives people a sense of uncertainty and a lack of control. They don't know where their gaps are, how they can improve. They're also not getting like positive reinforcement and recognition. So it just leaves a lot of people with a question mark about like, how am I actually doing? And that lack of information can be really damaging. So what I've observed in my therapy practice with my clients is a lot of predicting the future or filling in the blanks. So linking back to what Melissa shared earlier, we're constantly screening for threats, right? So if you don't have information to tell you whether you're doing well or whether there's a problem, you fill in that blank yourself. And that's when it can be problematic, because people start making assumptions, potentially even like exploring big life decisions based on that lack of information. So I've had clients who are thinking, oh, actually, I don't think I'm doing very well in this job, so I think I'm probably going to look for a new one in 6 months' time. Or I think I really performed so badly on that project, so I'm not going to put myself forward for this promotion that's coming up. And that can obviously, like for the individual, that's very limiting. It's holding them back from personal growth. But also for an organization, you're then getting employees who are not actively stepping up and thriving. So feedback, such an important piece of that. It helps to fill in those blanks and remove any ambiguity that might be there. I want to say it's a relatively straightforward fix, but unfortunately it's not, because I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with feedback, giving it and receiving it. It's kind of nerve-wracking. So I think for anyone who's listening now and is thinking, okay, I'm not giving enough feedback, or I want to try giving more feedback. It's like anything, right? Practice helps. So try and figure out a way to do it in small ways. so that you can just build it into your kind of daily, weekly habit of how you are as a manager, or perhaps it's with your team members. And if it's okay for me to go on, because I know I've talked a lot about this topic, I'm very passionate, I can give some simple steps that might be helpful. So firstly, deliver the feedback as soon as possible. Do it in the same week as when the event happens that warrants the feedback. Don't let it linger. Don't wait too long. Make sure it's a good time. Don't rush it. Give the person the heads up. That helps give them a sense of control as well. Make sure it's clear, specific, and action-oriented. So base it on observation. For example, perhaps a colleague or one of your team members delivered a presentation and you have feedback for them. You say, I noticed that you seem nervous in that presentation. Then help them to understand the impact of that. It actually distracted me from the content of what you were saying because you were talking a bit too fast. And I know how much effort you put into that. And I really wanted to listen, but it was a bit hard to follow. It was very specific. And then you help them think about the action that they could take to improve. So would you be interested in signing up for this presentation training? Maybe we could do it together. So you're helping them to think of what they can do next. And that gives people a sense of control again. It really helps to show them this is fixable. It's a learning opportunity. You can do something about it. Simple way to remember that is the OIA framework. So if you want to jot that down, OIA, observation, impact, and action. Okay, and I'm going to stop there and pass to Melissa.
Okay. So before we continue with this wonderful topic, we have a comments. Oh, okay. It's just a hi from Xia, China. I believe you're from China. KL, okay. KL. Thank you, Rita and panelists, for this so relevant topic in today's environment. Wow. Love that. Thank you, Xia. And so while Stephanie was mentioning feedback, right, that has made me to remember the time that I was a Toastmaster. And some of you may have heard of Toastmaster Club, right? Basically, it's an organization training you to be a good speaker. And the way that we learn in Toastmaster is to listen to feedback, but at the same time, we also give feedback. So we always go for this positive feedback and then areas for improvement. And there is a magic word that we learn when we give feedback. Say, for example, we have to say something positive first. Then after that, when it goes for the areas improvement, never use the word but. If you use the word but, everything will turn from positive into negative. So always use and instead. So this has reminded me that, okay, never use the word but when you give your feedback. Okay, anyway, so let's, Melissa, I know that you have something to give a supplement, right? Just go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I think, this is where I see burnout is what I see from both me, sitting in an organization before and I have clients in front of me. And also when you talk about organization pattern, that's where I can drive from my experiences in the organization. But I want to first echo on Stephanie. I know she talks a lot about feedback. I just want to add a point for audience to understand why that's so important, because a lot of time it's not about workload. Oh, lots of workload. It is about workload with lack of clarity. So when there's workload, lack of clarity, you're going home, even you're going home without working, but cognitively, you have this cognitive load that never switches off because you never know when is this work, being done, what's the priority, or you never know what well done means to you, what it looks like. So you go home, but, physically, but mentally, you're still at that desk trying to figure out how you complete your work. And that's part of the things that drives the burnout. And I just want to throw that explanation. But going back to your questions, I noticed I used but I think it's okay here. I want to say something about Rita. The questions you bring, I really like it. You said that, what are the organization patterns that you see that actually creates pressure, even in a company with good intentions. I like that word, even company with good intentions, because oftentimes what I see is that a lot, burnout doesn't come from bad people making bad decisions. Burnouts come from good people with a good intention, but doesn't see that pattern very clearly. So what pattern it is? One pattern I really notice, and I really notice is that every strength a company culture that promotes, actually on the other side, there's that shadow. So if I take resilient, for example, right? A lot of organizations celebrate, promote, value resilient as a core value. But the shadow side of it is, admitting that you're struggling actually starts to look at the value for resilience, right? So when the leadership say, we value resilience, but what the employee hear? They're hearing, oh, so don't let me see you're not coping. And that's making the employees hiding what's really going on until it's too late. So every culture that we promote has a shadow, and we need to be mindful of that. The second thing is this really connects me to the second thing I want to talk about is I call it performative wellness. Now, I see a lot of company, and a company that I advise, the company that asked me to structure their wellness, program, mental health program. They already wrote out those, mental health benefits. You can see counselor at the expense of the firm, or this wellness being day, and let's all talk about wellness, or this medication app, you can do, all with great intention. But the unspoken message is, okay, we have those resources, but please don't actually need that, right? So we can ignore the fact that people worry about using them, actually subtly being labeled as, oh, I have low commitment, or I'm fragile, right? So that gap is, what's said and what's actually lived. That gap itself is actually the burner driver, because now people are not just exhausted, they are exhausted. But on top of that, they need to pretend that they are not exhausted, they are fine. And it's double load on them. And that itself is a burnout driver. So those are the things I want to supplement. Thank you.
Wow, very interesting comment, right? While you're putting together a wellness program for your clients, you also send a message to the employee that you're fragile. That's why you need help with the organization. So you have to be very careful with that. So, Dr. Bernadette, anything to add on?
I just want to add on is the personal touch. Because company always, a very formal kind of that we have to work this, work that. But if there is a personal touch from a leader or from a colleague, I think the burnout intensity will be easily, solve it by itself. If there is some colleagues coming to you and say, we tackle this together, or you are not alone, this will feel much better. So the clients that I'm seeing is often because of burnout, so they have signs of depression, anxiety, somatic, complaints. But if there are colleagues that are sharing this together, this burnout will be easily be treated.
Okay, we have some messages here from Pam, my friend Pam. Thank you, Steph. Giving feedback to a subordinate. OIA, right? Observation, impact, and action. Very nice. So a few hellos from different people from different part of the world. This one, what boundaries help employees perform at their best without sacrificing their well-being? Would like to take this question. Which boundaries help employees perform at their best without sacrificing or undermining their well-being?
I don't know. I would take a first crack at it, and Steph and Benedict, please supplement. And this is really goes back to, I think it's really summarizing the core thing, the feedback from staff, and also the human touch from Benedict. And all we said about autonomy. I think it is that what I hear and what I think is important is that regular, systematic checking in with the employee. It's not that, what I mean by that is not like, oh, how are you today, when you bump into the employee or team in the hallway, or in the beginning of the team, you were saying that, oh, how are you? How's everyone doing? Not that, because if you ask that questions in that setting, you'll get a reflexive answer. Like, fine, we're just busy, right? It is that you need to have a very structured, regular, one-on-one check-in with the employee on specifically on three things: their workload, their stress, and their capability. And I think leaders needs to learn how to create that safe environment. When you ask that questions, so that employees feel like they're being judged, they're not feel like this is part of a performance review. They feel like this is a safe environment. They can really open to have a conversation about where they got stuck, and what's their what kind of help they actually needed. So I think to have that regular scheduled one-on-one conversation with that, it's very important to make sure that employees perform at its best. So I will pause here. I know, I'll leave it for Steph and Benedict to add.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you, Melissa. Yeah. So I think this one, I love that regular check-in, right? I can remember that this is one of the strategy for people working from home, especially during the COVID time, right? A lot of company would require their employees to work from home because they didn't have the choice. And then because they work from home, that's why giving them regular check-in is one of the way out to conduct with them. So it seems that now a lot of companies will require their employees to go back to work in the office. So this is not something that we should only do when they work from home. We should also do it when they even work in the office. Very nice message. Thank you. So Stephanie or Benedict, would you like to add on?
I would like to add on to the boundary side. I appreciate the question can come in. How do we balance, the boundaries of not going too far and affecting our mental health? That itself brings the awareness of oneself. So how can we not go too far, and how can we keep our mental health healthy and work job balance? That is a very critical and artistic form. But if you have a security or have a belongings from the company, this boundary can draw much easier.
Very nice, huh? To use to make a balance, right? Okay. And if we have sense of belongings with the company, the boundary will not that far. So Stephanie, anything to add on before we move on to another question?
Yeah, I think setting boundaries super important for protecting your work-life balance and your well-being. And sometimes it can be really hard to maintain them in particular, scenarios. For example, if suddenly a big piece of work comes in and there's an urgent deadline, suddenly your personal boundary around your time, perhaps you were planning to go to the gym that evening, becomes a bit threatened. But I think what's important there is giving the employee, when it comes back to autonomy again, is to give them the sense of control about whether or not they shift that boundary or not. So, for example, if you're a manager and this happens, you've got a deadline, you've got to ask your team to work overtime, involving them in that discussion and saying like, look, this is happening. I'm really sorry. This might mean we need to reschedule personal priorities, but giving them giving the team the opportunity to make that decision and to decide whether that's something they want to do. Just involving them in that discussion gives them a sense of control, and they're the ones making the decision, not the organization crossing that boundary.
Thank you so much. Autonomy is the word, right? Giving them a sense of control. Okay, in the interest of time, let's move on. We still have 22 seconds left. Sorry, 22 minutes left. 22 minutes left. Okay, let's move on. Let's see here. Okay, in your experience, what are the early emotional or behavioral warning signs that a team's mental health is deteriorating? And how can leaders intervene before it becomes a crisis? Maybe Dr. Bennett DeWall, you'd like to take this one?
Sure. I think people come to me for therapy is because they have already signs or severe signs of mental health issues from work, especially. And as a leader or as a company boss, I think it's crucial for them to know each employee's function at their best. So, for example, if the employee have some physical sign or behavioral sign like withdrawal, drop in responsiveness, and more mistake or rework have to do, and increased avoidance, short-temper communication, frequent last-minute emergency, unusual absence or sick but not sick patterns, and last but not least, people stop speaking up. So these are the early signs that leaders can pick on if that employer had early signs of being mentally not very stable. So as a intervene, we as a leader can make steps that we were talking about earlier. How do we prevent burnout? How do we have a good security and autonomy for the team? So we can intervene a bit earlier to avoid the severity of what my clients or the people that are coming to see me would be having a lot of somatic complaints, and they will got depression and more severe signs of anxieties.
Okay, very good. Anybody would like to supplement before we move on?
Yeah, I would quickly like to set. Benedict mentioned all of it. In my mind, I like to just to help audience remember, and also help leader to train. I think this question really shows that you would often hear the leader said, "I really don't see that coming. I really don't." But actually, those signs that Benedict mentioned, it's there. It's very subtle, but it's always there. And to help the leader, to train the leaders to understand it, and because none of the leaders are therapists, right? But if the leaders can train to look out for those warning signs, then that will be helpful. And I would like to just categorize into 3 categories. One is behavior, and there's a behavior withdrawal that Benedict mentioned. It's that not participating in the meeting anymore, or shut off your camera, or short replies in the chat, or not asking the questions as they used to be. In psychology term, we call it psychological distancing. So it's that behavior, that withdrawal that you see. Second category, again, is the somatic complaints that Benedict mentioned, like, the sickness or the sleeping problem, the headache, or all those unexplained, physical symptoms that just come up with no explanation. Oh, I went to the health check, cannot figure out what it is. Those are the somatic, symptoms that indicating that something is actually wrong already. The third one is emotionally, those like uncharacteristic emotional response, like getting very irritable over very small things, or disproportionate frustration. All those things doesn't look like that person before. Those are the things that we need to look out for. So training everyone, not just leaders, training everyone to look out for your colleague about those small warning signs is useful for the organization. Thank you.
I think spot on. It has made me to remember that there is a training called Mental Health First Aider Training. For those leaders who would love to spot this kind of sign or what we call as the signals, just consider joining this kind of training to show your love for your employees before it happens. Okay, so there is a question here from Shah. What would say to be one key organizational behavior that leaders should prioritize to focus more on mental health for business sustainability? What would say to be one key organizational behavior that leaders should prioritize to focus more on mental health?
I'll jump in for this one.
Yes.
I think role modeling vulnerability, because I think one of the things we've talked about is having a conversation about mental health, using resources that are available. But then there's that, what Melissa mentioned, the shadow effect of, is that actually okay? Like, if I do that, am I going to be penalized in some way? If you see senior management or your role models doing that, then it really changes the atmosphere. People feel that this is allowed and it's normalized. It's not so stigmatized anymore. So I would say that is one of the key changes, behavioral changes, that has such a powerful trickle-down effect.
Okay, anybody would like to add on?
I absolutely agree with Stephanie. I'm modeling, embracing the vulnerability, and then starting from the leader, showing that I also have this vulnerable moments, and you're not weird, you're not exceptional. This is how normal. It's very important. But just to expand it a little bit, if one key organizational behavior leaders need to learn, I think, is to expand on what I said about that regular one-on-one catch up on how are you on your workload, everything, and really to complete that conversation. Now, I think to get into that conversation is easy, right? Leaders know what to do. But what if really the employees then open up their heart and say, yeah, I am struggling, really. This is really tough. This is really difficult. This is really difficult. I feel so sick about burnout on this project. Then what the leaders say. I think to handle that conversation is also what leaders need to learn. How? I think there are a few things. Number one is to normalize, as Steph said, normalize that conversation. The first thing is not to say, yeah, we're all stressed out and just push it on. No, the first thing is to really normalize that. Oh, I can see, of course, this is the biggest client that we have. You work so hard on getting this deal. On top of that, you have also other projects you're struggling with. Is to know, of course, you will feel, burnout. The first thing is to normalize how employees feel, so that the door remains open. Because can you imagine if you say, we're all busy, just push it on, then immediately you shut the door back, and the door may not even open. But when you normalize it, then the employees feel validated, they're feeling being validated, then they may tell you more why they got stuck, why they're burned out, what's the stress they see, what's the catastrophic thinking they may have. It's open that conversation for you to have the next conversation. So I think it's really important for leaders to learn how to have that conversation, the workload stress conversation.
Very nice. Okay, in the interest of time, let's move on to other questions. Let me see. The fourth one. Okay, how does psychological safety translate into measurable business outcomes, such as innovation, decision quality, and risk reduction? So this is the question always asked by the management. How does it translate into business outcomes? Who would like to take this one?
I would love to respond to this one, particularly on innovation, because that's where my previous work experience sits. So I found it really interesting, actually, through my work as a counsellor, to learn that the conditions that allow and enable an organization to innovate are actually really similar to those that help an individual to psychologically thrive. So one of the key things that innovation relies on is experimentation. So an organization kind of needs to have a comfort level with trial and error, being able to test things, to share half-baked ideas before they're 100% perfect. Then you're much more likely to see innovative outcomes. And of course, that relies on having a culture of psychological safety, because people need to feel comfortable doing that. Innovation also depends strongly on feedback. So if you think about piloting or testing a new product or service, what you're really doing is putting an idea out there so that you can receive feedback on it. And negative feedback is actually, or constructive feedback, is a really essential part of that process. You want that feedback so that then you can improve on whatever that product or service is. And so in order to do that, you really need psychological safety. So I think it's really clear that how important that is in order for an organization to innovate. On the flip side, innovation culture, like running innovation events, challenges, workshops, these kind of things, are really great for developing psychological safety. So they kind of go hand in hand. It helps to get people into the habit of that kind of experimentation, trial and error process. It doesn't even necessarily need to be something like super creative that's launched, or, you know, something that's very time consuming. It could just be the piloting of a new, I don't know, Excel spreadsheet or something, or perhaps it's the piloting of a new team meeting format, to get people comfortable with trying out new things and saying like, hey, okay, we're going to try this today for the whole of this week. It's something new. We're going to test whether it works. We're going to get feedback on that. If it doesn't work, that's totally fine. We haven't failed. We're testing something, we're learning, we're getting feedback, and then we're going to improve and we're going to try again. So just being able to build that kind of innovation approach into the way you work can have a really powerful knock-on effect on psychological safety as well within your teams.
Very nice. So it goes back to feedback, right? Okay, so anything to add on before we move to another question?
I will add on this, but also I just saw the question coming in exactly, to this question we talk. Like the question is, what does a psychologically safe work environment actually look like in practice, and then how does it impact the bottom line? And I will share also from my experiences as a chief compliance officer in various organizations. It is absolutely very important to have a physically safe work environment. And what does it look like? It is basically an environment that people are free to speak up, right? You're not afraid to be judged. And you're not afraid that when you say something that you have all those catastrophic thinking in your mind that say, oh, if I say this, my boss will hate me. If I say that, they would think that I'm stupid. You're not afraid of being judged because it's a judgment-free environment. It's a safe environment for you to speak up. And that environment is not based on fear-based, right, environment. I think that's what psychologically safe environment looks like. And how it affects the bottom line, like speaking from my experiences, if there's an environment is where you cannot speak freely, then, for an organization to make, it will affect your bottom line of a decision making. Because at the end of the day, we want to make a well-informed decision, right? And then oftentimes to make a well-informed decision, you need to collect all different kinds of perspective. And that's the beauty of organization. But if you miss that psychologically safe environment that where people are not free to speak up and worry about when they speak up, there will be consequences, then, you will not have that all information collected for you to make a great decision. So I think, yes, it does affect your bottom line on decision making.
Thank you so much. Again, speak up, right? To allow them an environment for them to speak up, express themselves. Anybody would like to add on to this question? Answers to this question? Anyone? If no, let's move on to our another question. We still have 6 minutes left. Maybe let's do it like this. Let's have the closing remarks from our speakers today. So I would love to have, because in today's session we have a lot of wisdom from our speakers. And so I would love to have a speaker to let us know at least one key takeaway from the session today. So who would love to go first?
I will try, but Stephanie, I may steal your modeling a little bit. When I think about mental health organization, mental health, employees burnout, and what organization where leaders can do. Some people think about, and this speaks to when I help the organization on their mental health program. Some people think it's bottoms up, some people think it's top down. I really think that top down is really, really effective in a way where it is leaders need to show that it is okay to talk about vulnerability. It is okay to talk about their own anxiety. It is okay to talk about their own catastrophic thinking. It is okay to talk about their own inner critics that they have. I am not good enough. And how that triples down in and reflecting your workload, how you handle the work, your stress, your fight and freeze, your mode. And it is really for the leader to show that vulnerability in front of the employees so the employees know that, oh, while our company is valuing resilience, it is also okay to talk about what are the part that's not okay. Only when that is done through the leader, a spectrum of leader, all showing that, then the door is easily to be opened by employees to knock on your door and say, hey, I got stuck on this. Can we talk about this? And only when that happens, when you check in with the employees and say, how are you today? You are not going to get a reflexive answer saying that I'm fine, I'm just busy. And that opens to a lot of door for a lot of other mental health tools to come in. So I would use that as my summarize. Thank you.
Okay. Role modeling is the key. Okay, so Stephanie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think it linked to what Melissa shares, like be the leader that says, hey, actually, I don't really know the answer to this question, or I'm not sure if this is going to work, but let's give it a go. Let's try. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't matter if it fails. Let's test it out. Let's get some feedback. And be the one who role models that, because that really does a lot in terms of saying, hey, this is a safe space. This is a space where we can learn together, where we support each other, where we can, trial things and take risks. And it's also a safe space to voice out if you don't know something. It just sets that tone, I think, from the top that tells people this is a safe space and we're here to support you. And then on the autonomy side of things, like, here's information, here's feedback, here's data that you can now use to move forward and grow as a person, which is ultimately what everyone really wants to achieve. So yeah, I think if I was to summarize it, that would be my key takeaways.
Thank you so much. How about Bernadette? You would like to give your closing remarks? Hello?
Model of a company, we have to keep an open mind and provide a safety for employees so that they can voice their feedbacks and what they really think deep inside their heart, right? So leaders need to keep a positive mindset and be open so that the employees can share what they really want. And to role model this, I think self-care is very important. Not even the individual, but as a whole company, as a team leader, as a team building, strategy. Self-care is really important to bring out from the company.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, so it's towards the end of our session today. Hang on. Okay, so it's towards the end of our session today. Thank you, Stephanie, Melissa, and Benedict for such rich and grounded insights. Today's conversation reinforces a powerful message. Mental health is business sustainability. It shapes performance, decision quality, innovation, retention, and ultimately long-term organizational resilience. A few key takeaways from the session today. Mental health fuels sustainable performance, not just well-being. Psychological safety, we spend a lot of time talking about this term, right? Is a strategic asset that drives innovation and reduces risks. It gives employees their autonomy and have a good feedback system is the key. And a poor feedback system defeats innovation. Burnout is systematic and prevention must be organizational. Having a regular check-in and balance the boundaries will be the key to avoid employee burnout. Leaders shape emotional climate every day in every interaction. Role modeling is the key, and be open-minded. Human-centered cultures protect trust, reputation, and long-term value. And we need personal touch and also self-care as the company culture. And finally, investing in mental health is part of risk management, not a nice to have. And for those who join us live today, thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. Please check the infographic summarizing today's key insights, and we'll send it out today. And I'm Rita Choi from HHRM and Coaching Engage Plus, and has been a pleasure moderating this important conversation. Have a meaningful and healthy afternoon ahead. And thanks for the wonderful wisdom and insight shared by our speakers today. Okay, see you next week.
Thank you.